On a fall morning in 1987, Sister Agnes woke up and felt something was off. No church bells, no Ruth McClain sitting in the front pew like she always did. Her room was empty, her habit still hanging neatly. Her Bible left open to the passage in Gethsemane where Jesus prayed alone before betrayal. Ruth, the only black nun at St. Mary of Solace, convent, had vanished. No screams were heard, no signs of struggle, no note. And most chilling of all was the silence that followed. No deep search, no questions asked. If she didn't leave, then where was she? And why did no one try to find out? 35 years later. On the exact day of her 35th death anniversary, Father Michael, the priest, who once mentored Ruth, returned to the old grounds. The convent had long been torn down, the surrounding woods fenced off under the name of private conservation. But in the stillness, he heard something inexplicable Gregorian chants, echoing from beneath the earth. Ruth McClain was born in 1964 in Savannah, Georgia, one of the oldest cities in the American South, known for its cobblestone streets, sweeping oak trees, and solemn old churches. But for the black residents living on the city's west side, Savannah wasn't the picturesque postcard tourists adored. It was a place where social injustice still clung to every corner, where the American dream suffocated inside rotting rental homes and quiet segregation. Ruth's family was among the very few black Catholic households in the area. Her father, Darnell McClain, worked as a city garbage truck driver. Her mother, Janice, was a cook for St. Augustine's Parish, where Ruth grew up surrounded by the smell of incense church hymns and humble but warm community meals. She was the youngest of 3 sisters and the only one who chose a religious path. Even as a child, people said Ruth was different. While other girls jumped rope or flipped through ebony magazines, Ruth devoured scripture and quietly studied adults. She spent hours listening to the priest's homilies and even volunteered to clean the altar every Friday afternoon. People said she had a gaze that looked straight through you, not judgmental, but as if she understood something deeper. In her junior year of high school, an event changed her life. Her best friend Letitia became pregnant and was kicked out by her parents. Ruth brought her to the church for help, but the priest on duty turned them away, saying, "This is no place for immoral girls." Ruth didn't argue. She simply brought her friend home, cared for her for a month, and prayed quietly every night. Then she went to her parish priest and said, "If the church can't find room for mercy, then I'll be the one to change that." From that moment on, Ruth committed herself to religious life, but the road was anything but easy. In the 1980s, very few Southern convents accepted black women even if they didn't say it aloud. The reason was always not a cultural fit. Ruth was rejected by 3 major orders in Atlanta and Birmingham. She began to think she would never be ordained. Then came a letter from the St. Mary of Solace convent, a small secluded community hidden in the North Georgia mountains, inviting her to begin a temporary vow period. No promises, but at least a door had opened. The convent sat in a valley surrounded by tall pines and an old cemetery. 6 nuns lived there, 4 over 61 in her 40s, and Ruth the youngest and the only black sister. At first, she felt out of place, but she soon adapted to the strict, silent rhythm of monastic life. She woke at 5 a.m., prayed, gardened, cleaned, and studied scripture. But Ruth didn't want her world to end at stone walls. She asked for permission to visit the nearby townhome to a struggling black community to teach literacy and cook meals for the needy. At first, Mother Superior Agnes objected, insisting that nuns should maintain a cloistered life. But Ruth persuaded the local parish priest, Father Michael, write a recommendation. And so, every Wednesday, Ruth took the bus down the mountain. Before long, the name Sister Ruth became a fixture in town. Children called her the Cookie Nun because she always brought homemade sweets. Elders called her the Holy Smile because her eyes made them feel seen and understood. To the poor black community there, Ruth wasn't just a helper. She was one of them, and the only one who had crossed the sacred threshold of the white church. Ruth once wrote in a letter to her sister, "Some nights I hear footsteps behind my door, but when I open it, there's no one there." Her presence slowly became a symbol. But with that, tensions inside the convent began to grow. Some sisters, especially Agnes, started to show discomfort. They didn't openly oppose her, but the signs were clear. The seat beside Ruth was always left empty at meals. During prayer sessions, she was often accidentally left out when the group was divided. Once, when Ruth asked to hold a special prayer session in the chapel for the local black community, Sister Agnes simply said, "We don't see color here, but let's not make a big deal out of it." Ruth didn't respond, but in the journal found later, she wrote, "Faith should be a home, but for people like me, it's just a porch. We're not allowed inside, only allowed to shelter for a moment." Still, Ruth didn't give up. She continued her work, kept loving, and prayed even harder. She believed that with enough patience, she could shift the prejudice around her. Until one day in mid-October 1987, everything stopped. The night before she disappeared, Ruth told a younger sister, Helena, that she saw a flashlight outside her window around midnight. Helena laughed, said it was probably her imagination. But the next morning, Ruth didn't show up for morning prayers. Her room was tidy, her bed neatly made, her habit hanging on the hook. But Ruth was gone, and just like that, one person vanished, and no one said a word. October 14th, 1987, began like any other morning at the St. Mary of Solace convent. The air was cool, and a thin mist draped across the tall pines. At exactly 5:00 a.m., the chapel bell rang as usual, calling the sisters to morning prayer. But something was off. Sister Helena, one responsible for morning roll, call noticed someone missing. Ruth McClain wasn't in her usual front row seat, where she was always the first to arrive. Helena headed down to the dorm hallway. Ruth's door was slightly ajar. She knocked softly, no answer. Pushing the door open, she found everything perfectly in place. The bed was neatly made, the pillow set just right. Her habit still hung on the hook, and on the desk, Ruth's Bible lay open to the same passage she always read, the Garden of Gethsemane. There were no signs of a struggle, no missing suitcase, no letters, no money gone. Everything was eerily still. Helena alerted Sister Agnes. For the next 2 hours, the entire convent searched every corner, chapel, dining hall, herbal cellar, garden, but there was no trace of Ruth. By late morning, they called the police. Sheriff Carl Jensen and 2 officers arrived. They took notes, asked a few questions, but didn't launch a real investigation. "Why, there's no evidence of a crime," Jensen said. "Maybe she just left on her own." Father Michael was informed and drove up that afternoon. When he asked whether they had searched the surrounding woods, an officer replied, "No. Even the dogs didn't pick up anything." When Father Michael suggested expanding the search area, he was asked to leave, accused of disrupting convent order. In the days that followed, a heavy silence fell over the convent. The sisters each harbored their own private theories, but no one spoke them out loud. Some thought Ruth had left under pressure. Others suspected something darker, but no one dared say it. 2 weeks later, Father Michael organized a civilian search. 30 people joined, mostly black parishioners from nearby churches. They combed dirt trails, forest edges, even old wells. A faint, oversized boot print was found near the wood stew, large for anyone in the convent. But without hard evidence, the search was called off after 3 days. In Ruth's room, Father Michael discovered a small notebook hidden behind a portrait of the Virgin Mary. Inside were scattered notes, "Someone's watching me every night." "Old cellar door locked, but I hear echoes." "Strange man in the woods. Sister Agnes told me not to speak. I saw them open that door at midnight, but no one admits it." When he gave the notebook to police, they simply shook their heads. Not enough to reopen the case. Desperate, Father Michael tracked down old witnesses. One local farmer recalled seeing a large truck headlights off Silently Drive into a trail behind the convent on the night of October 13th. Less than 30 minutes later, it left the same way. He didn't see anyone get in or out. Where had Ruth gone? In 1989, the St. Mary convent officially closed. The building was demolished. The surrounding forest was sold to a private organization now fenced off and marked "No Trespassing Private Property." Since then, no one has been allowed access. One detail continued to haunt Father Michael. When he requested a ground survey of the old cement slab where the chapel once stood, Sister Agnes sharply refused. "We won't let anyone disturb sacred ground," she said. But Michael knew something wasn't right. An old friend, Father Joseph, who had lived briefly at the convent in 1984, confirmed there's a hidden cellar beneath the lower level. No one's ever been allowed inside. I used to hear things at night. Echoes, like a voice. In 1991, when another priest mentioned Ruth's name during a closed-door church meeting, the room went silent. That priest was soon transferred to a remote parish. No one ever brought it up again. Every year on October 14th, Father Michael lights a candle for Ruth. He's kept every file letter, note, and article. In one of his writings, he said, "If I don't speak, this story dies." And Ruth dies a second time. Then, in October 2022, an environmental survey team entered the old forest to test the soil. They stood near the cement foundation where the chapel once stood. One young engineer pressed his ear to the ground and heard something unimaginable, faint, rhythmic chanting in ancient Latin. Gregorian hymns echoing from beneath the earth. A week later, he called Father Michael, his voice trembling. "Father, I don't believe in ghosts, but there's something down there that hasn't found peace." Father Michael returned to the old convent grounds after hearing from the young survey engineer. He requested official permission from the local government to examine the old concrete foundation where the chapel once stood. At first, the city denied the request, citing private property restrictions, but after the environmental team submitted a formal report citing unexplained subterranean sound phenomena and pressure from the local black community, especially those who remembered Ruth, the city granted a 3-day permit. On the first day of the survey, Father Michael and 2 accompanying archaeologists began breaking up the concrete. Beneath it, they discovered a cast iron hatch-edged, but intact. Etched into the surface were the Latin words "Sic luceat lux vestra," "Let your light so shine." The hatch opened by rotating a central lever. Below was a narrow wooden staircase descending into the earth. No one spoke. They switched on flashlights and went down. The cellar was a circular chamber roughly 10 meters across. Its stone walls showed signs of once being whitewashed. There were 3 small doors leading to branching tunnels. Religious symbols lined the walls, crosses, angels, and a faded, hand-painted image of the Virgin Mary. At the center of the room stood an old iron bed. On it were shackles. The group fell silent. Father Michael could barely stay on his feet. He stepped closer, hands trembling as he touched the chains. One was broken, another stained with old blood, a pillow with a deep sunken impression. Then from the right-hand tunnel came a sound, tantum ergo sacramentum, an old Latin hymn. A woman's voice, soft, measured, but so cold it felt as if it came from a place where light could not reach. They followed the sound and froze. It was coming from an old cassette player. Next to it lay a leather-bound notebook etched with the name Ruth McClain. And beside it, something even more haunting, a long curled strand of black hair about 20 centimeters long, tied with a red ribbon. One of the archaeologists began to cry, whispering, "This isn't a relic. It's a wound that never closed." Inside the notebook, Ruth's journal entries became increasingly fragmented over time. Day 1, they locked me down here. They say it's because I disobeyed. Day 4, no food, only holy water and scriptures. Day 9, I heard someone crying last night. Am I not alone down here? Day 12, I asked God to forgive me, but if this is a trial, I don't understand it. Police immediately reopened the case. In the archives, they uncovered a list of 5 nuns, marked as transferred without cause, between 1962 and 1985. 2 of them were never reaccepted by any other convent. One, Lena Harris, had been reported missing by her family. Digging deeper, they found a handwritten letter from another former nun. "I can't keep hiding what's happening in the cellar. This isn't purification, it's punishment. They call it soul cleansing, but all I see is pain and fear." This was no longer just Ruth's story. It was a pattern, a system of abuse protected by religious authority, silence, and deep-seated bias, especially against women of color within conservative faith communities. A former nun now in hiding out of state broke down when contacted by a reporter. Ruth resisted. She wanted to leave, and for them that was the unforgivable sin. But Sister Agnes and Father Thomas, the 2 individuals believed to be directly involved, had since passed away. No one was ever charged. No one confessed. Police closed the case with a final report, confirmed a presence of unauthorized detention structure beneath St. Mary Convent. Biological evidence consistent with the timeline of Ruth McClain's disappearance insufficient evidence to identify responsible parties. For Father Michael, that wasn't enough. He held the first ever public memorial for Ruth 35 years later, right above the unearthed cellar. Over 200 people came, many of them black. Many had never met Ruth, but they said she was our sister. And the silence ends now. That day, an elderly woman who had gone to school with Ruth stepped forward. She brought a faded photo, Ruth's smiling hair, tied neatly arms full of scripture books. Through tears, she said, Ruth believed light could reach even the darkest places, but we left her in a place no one wanted to look. And together, the crowd began to sing her favorite hymn. The song echoed through the woods, across the concrete, and over 35 years of silence. No one knows exactly what Ruth endured, but now at least, no one is pretending she was never there. And you, if someone in your community vanished in silence, would you ask questions, or would you turn away? The assumption that Ruth left on her own is now officially gone. The truth was never just a disappearance. The truth is, Ruth was held, and maybe she wasn't the only one. The truth once unearthed did not bring clarity, it only deepened the darkness. Just weeks after Ruth's memorial, anonymous letters began to arrive at Father Michael's doorstep and at the offices of local journalists. Handwritten, unsigned, and packed with chilling accusations, occult rituals, silencing conspiracies, and collusion between the church and the state. One letter read, "You've only seen one cellar. There are 3 more where they imprison souls through silence." The story began to spread. An independent TV crew from Atlanta arrived to film a report. But within 24 hours, they were forced off the grounds by private security hired by the corporation that now owned the forest. Fear crept back into the community. People who had once supported the investigation began to retreat. Older black residents spoke bluntly, "We've seen too much buried. You touch the church, you invite a curse." One night, Father Michael's car was vandalized. Scrawled across the windshield, "Stop. Even light has its limits." He did not give up, but he began to realize the cost of truth, not just for himself, but for those around him. In an interview, he confessed, "I used to believe exposing the truth was holy, but now I understand some truths shatter faith itself." The story of Ruth had transformed from a missing person case to a full-blown crisis of conscience. The question was no longer what happened. It was, should we have uncovered it at all? Was this now an attack on the church? Was it shaking faith in God? One young parishioner posted online, "I believe in the Blessed Mother, but I also believe if God is real, he wouldn't want us hiding women's bodies beneath his house." Civil rights groups stepped in, calling for a full excavation of the former convent site. The company that owned the land refused. The town government stayed silent. Then a bombshell, a leaked internal document, revealed that in 1991, local authorities had received a request from the Vatican, urging them not to expand the investigation at St. Mary's to avoid theological conflict. Trust didn't just shake, it collapsed. A nearby parish held a service for the forgotten souls beneath the sanctuary. But even that was disrupted by protesters yelling, "Don't turn the church into a morgue." Father Michael quietly left town soon after. In his final journal entry before leaving, he wrote, "I once believed light could redeem, but sometimes light only reveals truths too brutal for belief." Ruth's case had transcended crime. It had become a test of faith. For many, it was the reason they no longer went to church. But for others, like the young people who built Ruth's memorial, it was a call to action, a reminder that true faith doesn't come from the absence of sin. It begins with the courage to admit we were wrong, and we still have time to make it right. Jenna Lee, an investigative journalist known for exposing church cover-ups, began to dig deeper. She found that the private organization now owning the forest was tied to a Chicago-based investment trust loan, with known links to a major archdiocese. It raised a disturbing question: was the land acquired deliberately to bury what lay beneath it? Jenna interviewed former clergy and staff from the convent in the 70s and 80s. One man, Wallace, who had worked maintenance, recalled, "I was once ordered to seal up a cellar, but told not to ask why. When I did, Sister Agnes just looked at me and said, 'What's buried should stay buried.'" That sentence became a symbol of fear and of complicity. A local paper ran a 3-part investigative series titled "The Crypt Beneath the Cross." The church issued a strong rebuttal, calling it dangerous distortion, driven by rumor and emotion. But pressure from the community kept rising. A group of black college students staged a demonstration holding signs that read, "Ruth's soul still hasn't been laid to rest." Online, the hashtag #Justice for Ruth began to spread. Prominent black media figures spoke out. One Baptist pastor posted a video saying, "This is not an attack on faith. This is a journey to reclaim faith from the shadows." The case had sparked a larger reckoning in the black Catholic community about the church's role about silence and about who gets protected and who gets sacrificed. A conference was held in New Orleans titled "Faith and Silence: The Cost of Being Believed." Scholars, ministers, and survivors gathered to share their stories. There, for the first time, the mother of Lena Harris, missing since 1962, spoke publicly. Through tears, she said, "I'm 84 years old. I just want to know if my baby found peace." Ruth's story became a symbol. But for many, it remained an open wound, one of dozens, maybe hundreds, who were silenced in places we called sacred. At a prayer vigil in Harlem, one parishioner said, "If the church can't protect the least among us, then maybe it's time to rebuild the church from within." Father Michael, now living at a small monastery in the North, sent back a voice recording. He ended it with one simple truth: light doesn't mean shining everywhere. Sometimes light is standing still and looking at the truth without turning away. That's when the story shifted, from a case to a calling, a reminder that real faith never needs a body hidden beneath the altar. In the fall of 2023, exactly 36 years after Ruth disappeared, a team of independent filmmakers announced a multi-part documentary series titled "The Girl Beneath the Chapel." The project drew thousands of donations from across the country, most from the Black Catholic community, and those who had lived near the former grounds of St. Mary's Convent. The film didn't sensationalize. Instead, it focused on what still lived: Ruth's journal entries, her poems, the voices of those who remembered her. A recreated room of Ruth's space became the centerpiece of a traveling exhibit titled "The Forgotten Ones." In one unforgettable scene, Ruth's mother, now in a wheelchair, is brought to the pine tree where the underground chamber was found. She holds Ruth's rosary kept for 36 years and buries it there, her hands trembling. "I want my girl to stay where she once called home," she whispers. That moment struck a deep chord. It wasn't just private grief. It was the breaking point of a community long pushed to the margins. In 2026, for the first time in the local church's history, an official memorial was held for Ruth, naming her the unnamed servant of faith. The Archbishop issued a public apology for years of silence that denied her humanity. An independent commission was formed to review unresolved cases of missing religious women across the country. Early findings revealed at least 43 cases, most involving Black and Indigenous women under eerily similar circumstances. Ruth's story became a cornerstone in ethics, religious studies, and social justice courses in seminaries and secular universities alike. Professor Lisa Monroe described it as a living reminder that faith cannot be divorced from moral accountability. Students wrote essays, held debates, and proposed models for external oversight of closed religious institutions. In 2027, the Memorial Park, the Grove of Ruth, opened on the old convent land. At its center, a stone engraved with her own words from her journal: "If truth is a burden, let it fall on May better, that than others live in lies." Every year on October 14th, hundreds gather beneath the pine trees. They read unsent prayers, sing Ruth's favorite hymns, and leave notes that say, "We see you." The Faith in the Shadows movement emerged, led by young pastors, scholars, and former clergy speaking up for forgotten victims within religious communities. Ruth's image became the face of the national campaign, Name the Disappeared. That same year, Father Michael's final memoir was released, causing national uproar. He admitted that he had once known about the hidden hallway beneath the convent, that he had heard strange cries the night Ruth vanished, but chose silence. "I didn't believe I had the authority to question the church." His final confession read, "If I could go back, I would say Ruth's name loud. Clear, and never stop repeating it, because sometimes the only thing that keeps a soul alive is someone remembering they once existed." The book became required reading at the Eastern Seminary Institute. Ruth's story was the keynote topic of an international symposium, Faith and Silence, when belief becomes a cage. The Black Catholic community organized a nationwide campaign, Justice Through Remembrance. Ruth's name opened each event, setting the tone for others who had never been allowed to speak. A new generation of young Black Catholics began to raise their voices, not to tear down the church, but to redefine it. The McClain Foundation for Forgotten Women was officially launched, offering legal support, trauma counseling, and identity restoration for women who had vanished within closed religious systems. Ruth was no longer just a name, she was the cornerstone of a moral awakening. In a Catholic school in Baltimore, the principal, a young Black nun, keeps a framed photo of Ruth, smiling in her habit next to a quote, "No one should be forgotten just because they didn't fit the structure." In the southeastern U.S., where Black Catholic communities remained strong, religious schools began hosting annual symposia on justice and memory. The 2024 conference focused entirely on Ruth McClain's case, with Black women scholars, former nuns, and investigative reporters leading the panels. One theology professor said Ruth's story isn't just one woman's tragedy. It's a collective moral test. How do we respond when silence is baked into the structure? Media outlets like ProPublica Reveal and the 19th launched ongoing investigative series into religious institutional disappearances, starting with Ruth's reopened file. Dozens of families sent in new testimonies, many too afraid for decades to speak, pressured by stigma, fear, or the church's influence. A publishing house in Atlanta signed a deal to release Ruth's previously unpublished poems, kept safe by her mother for over 30 years. The collection, titled Unanswered Psalms, became a breakout phenomenon among Black Christian students, used in faith healing and trauma workshops nationwide. Mainstream media, from The Guardian US to PBS, revisited Ruth's case as a landmark in organizational failure and community-led memory restoration. Churches around the country, even those uninvolved, began hosting masses of name services, remembering those who disappeared unacknowledged in American religious history. Ruth McClain's name was always the first read aloud. Law and journalism students began to cite the disappearance of Ruth in theses intersecting ethics, historical justice, and the right to be heard. At Howard University, a special seminar titled Memory and Justice, From Ruth McClain to the Others, was offered. You don't need to wait for the future. Even now, Ruth is no longer forgotten. She is a weekly invocation, a sermon echo, a slide on a lecture screen, a candle lit in defiance. No one knows exactly what happened that night in 1987. But now one truth stands clear. Ruth McClain is no longer lost to silence. And you, what do you believe happened to Ruth? When the next person disappears into the dark, will you turn away, or will you speak their name? Ruth's story isn't just a personal tragedy, it's a mirror showing how silence can erase memory and how memory can bring justice back to life. If you've ever seen yourself in Ruthin, someone who just wanted to live with faith and integrity, then this story is yours too. We can turn back time, but we can do what's right today. Subscribe so you don't miss the stories that still need telling. Share this video if you believe truth deserves a voice. Leave a comment, not just to react, but to speak the names of those the world forgot. You're not alone. Ruth isn't alone. We are memory, and we are hope. Because some souls only truly rest when we remember to say their names.